on the broader China question, you'll see in the book, I also went back to the Qing dynasty, which was 221, and I followed all the cycles. And you'll see that through history, China was more often than any other country, number one or two, and then it goes through the cycle. And so it had a cycle which started really in the early 1800s, particularly around 1840, when it was almost on top of the world, but it was weak militarily because it was isolated and so on. And events, the British and other powers come in, and they begin the 100 years of humiliation. And you see in that that chart, you see a plunge in the power of that until World War II, the Civil War then that they had, and in 1949. And then in each one of those measures, with big bumps along the way, you see a rise. And particularly in 1970, Mao dies in 76, Deng Xiaoping comes in 78, and you then see two big policies, an open door policy and a reform policy that brought in more market economies. And you see from that point all the way through an explosive rise in the per capita, all the measures. Education, life expectancy. To put it in perspective, when I started to go to China in 1984, per capita income since then has increased by 24 times. So if you use all the measures, you'll see them in the book: education, competitiveness, share of world GDP. Their share of world GDP is comparable to the United States' share of world GDP. Share of world trade, theirs is considerably larger. At least China's a larger trading company. Technology development, all of those measures show that movement all the way up until now. And so now China is faced with some difficult issues. And if we choose to, we can get into those issues. But the force and the power and its approach, which is largely a semi-Confucian type of approach, has proven through history to be very powerful. As regards to your question of demographics is one of those. It's a particularly difficult issue in China, not just because of the demographics. I believe that demographics are not necessarily the biggest, a big problem if productivity increases faster. You know, output, total output is number of workers times output per work hour. And so if you have productivity, you can raise living standards by having productivity that's greater than that. And so it doesn't necessarily mean the number of people or the productivity. Of course, it means that a smaller number of people have to support a population that's older and so on. This is particularly challenging in China. And that is because the importance of the family and the single parent household. In other words, the social network, the family network is very important in China. And their lack of a pension system, an adequate pension system, is very problematic in China. So you have, let's say, a married couple, which is trying to take care of 4 alive parents without a social system to be able to do that, even a healthcare system and so on. That is a very burdensome, problematic area. And of Chinese population, that population over 65 is like about 350 million people. Okay, so you're dealing with something that is an issue in China. There are other issues in China. There's a nature issue. Always droughts and floods and water is a big issue. But there are other issues, but I'm just answering your question on demographics. Certainly demographics is a big issue in China.
But it sounds like from what you're saying, you don't think China has peaked from a growth and empire perspective, that its trajectory continues to be positive. Yes, it is.
there are important problems now in China, which I'll touch on. And then underneath that, there is great progress in the development of technologies, education, healthcare, and winners of technology wars are winners of wars. So yet there is a great power that exists. The problems that they're facing right now have to do with there is a debt economic problem, which has to do with the real estate problem and a debt problem, because real estate is such an important part of their economy. Counts for about 25% of the economy, and it counts for about 70% of savings, because a lot of people save in real estate. And so the wealth effect that that's having as it passes through is passing through their economy to have an effect on that. As I mentioned, acts of nature have historically been very important, and particularly in China. They've experienced many pandemics. This pandemic, I'm sure in their minds, this is another one of those pandemics. And the pandemic of COVID has certainly played an important role in a number of ways, economically and beyond that. And then other acts of nature, such as drought and water, are considerations that are happening. And then, of course, there is a leadership issue and the evolution of the questions of how exactly does the free enterprise system work, and how exactly do wealth gaps. In other words, the issue of common prosperity, and how does common prosperity work? I think many countries, the United States included, could do well with more common prosperity. And so, but how that works has been a question mark. And then the issue of small being better than big. In other words, breaking up technology companies or changing the power of technology companies and encouraging smaller technology companies and a very strong top-down approach to the management of that. And that has political issues and other issues. These are issues that exist now, as is the world environment. So the Chinese recognize the risks, just like most other people recognize the risks of war, different types of war. There are 5 kinds of war. There's a trade war, technology war, geopolitical influence war, a capital war related to an economic war, and then there's a military war. All of those risks are increasing. And so those factors together are playing a role to dampen the Chinese economy now. I view most of those, I believe, anyway, we'll see, as more transitory, and that the power of what they're doing underneath that surface is still very strong.